and Hillary tells me that there were well over 100 people signed up for this. So I know accessory dwelling units are very popular, and it's a big area. My name is Mike Malinowski. I'm an architect in private practice and also a consultant to AIA California. This is a bonus webinar. AIA California has a climate action series with a monthly webinar. By bonus, this is an additional webinar to the normal group that we have per month. AIA California, in addition, in its climate action to providing this webinar series, we developed a public-facing website. Last year we launched, actually, called Plus One House. The goal was to provide information about accessory dwelling units throughout California to allow people to understand more about regulation, financing, design, construction, uses, and we're really hoping to inspire and excite property owners at this potential. They're not for everyone, but they do provide some incredible opportunities for those for which it's a good fit. We did update the site earlier this year to reflect the new California laws. And behind the scenes, in addition to creating this website, we created a network of individuals throughout California, both design professionals and people working in the ADU space, as well as others, to share information. Anyone on this call who is interested in being part of that ongoing dialogue, which occurs sometimes on a daily basis, there are questions and challenges and issues. You can shoot an email to Katie Dahl. You see the contact information on your screen, and she will add you to our ADU network that's supported by AIA California. On today's webinar, we're going to work with Energy Code ACE, who has Gina Rada with us, to explore how Title 24 Part 6 Energy Code requirements in California touch on accessory dwelling units. The Energy Code splits ADUs into two sort of types: new residential buildings and addition to existing residential buildings. And the requirements are actually quite different depending on which of those two buckets your particular project might fall into. We're going to review how to classify your project and how to determine what design features are going to be required to comply with the 2019 Energy Code. Now, I know at this point in these times of such disruption, this global pandemic, you all have probably got a great amount of experience with Zoom platform and using the Q&A box, but for those of you, maybe there's one or two people who are relatively new to Zoom, there's a placed Q&A, you'll see it on the bottom or your right, and that'll be open throughout the seminar. We're going to hold questions until the end of the webinar, so Gina can get up ahead of steam and get through the material. And she's very knowledgeable about the topic. Before we started, I had a chance to chat with Gina. She's based in Northern California and actually works in this space. She told me that they're getting in up to half dozen accessory dwelling units a week, and she's been in the energy modeling field since 1991. She's an instructor and subject matter expert for Energy Code ACE and the investor-owned utilities, a certified energy analyst through KBEC, which is the Association of Energy Consultant Professionals, a lead AP, specializing in non-residential energy modeling, in addition to working on many kinds of residential projects, including accessory dwelling units. And with that,
that's stuck
Gina,
in there somewhere.
yeah, take it away, Gina. You've got the floor.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We practiced this earlier, so I'm hoping it'll go smoothly. Just want to confirm you guys are seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to dive right into this. This is a pretty beefy topic for us to handle in a 45 minutes. I'm hoping all of you are aware of Energy Code ACE. Everything we do is free to you because we are paid for by you, the ratepayers of California, and we are under the auspices of the California Public Utilities Commission. So I'm hoping you'll come check out our website. We have so much here, and we've really beefed up our offerings on how we're helping people understand ADUs, because it's a lot of questions we've been getting regarding this building type. Our website is www.energycodeace.com. So let's start right off with what is an ADU unit, accessory dwelling unit. For years, these were called in-law units, granny units, etc. And it's where we have a separate dwelling unit within a single home property. So there are some different classifications of ADUs out there, such as junior ADU. And the energy code just looks at ADUs as ADUs. Is if it's an additional dwelling unit, well, then you are going to have these requirements associated with that dwelling unit. I just had an interesting conversation with the building department. I think it was Santa Cruz. They're like, you know, we have a project where we're not considering it a dwelling unit because it's a junior ADU, and they don't have their own bathroom, they don't have their own kitchen. We're not calling it a dwelling unit. I'm like, well, then potentially we're not really calling it an ADU with the energy code, because a lot of these requirements are based on it being its own dwelling unit. So that's just one thing to be aware of. There's just some subtleties with the different definitions of ADU. And as was noted, you guys have a website that helps support all of these. This is a list of laws that have gone into play regarding ADUs in just the last couple of years. There's this great website provided by the California government, shall I say. This is one of my favorite websites. They are in the process of updating their accessory dwelling unit memorandum, and this is actually a pretty beefy document that incorporates all of these laws and what's going on with ADUs. So I suggest all of you kind of keep track of this website and keep checking in and seeing what they have available. We have as a handout that we gave all of you as the option to, hopefully you got your hands on it before you attended today, what we call a quick reference sheet. And this is really, honestly, we shoved a lot of what are the code requirements for the different building features associated with an ADU all on one page. And this is what I'm going to go through with you today with my time with you. We also have what's new, and this is for all residential, period. What's new for this energy code? This was a pretty beefy energy code change for residential construction, because we're in the year 2020, and California did have state goals that by 2020, new residential construction would be zero net energy. Well, we didn't quite meet the zero net energy goals, because all of the energy code requirements have to go through a very vigilant review of making sure everything will pay for itself over its lifetime with its energy savings. And Z&E wasn't able to be penciled out for all building types for all climate zones in California. So you'll see our goals look a little bit different for new construction, and we'll look at that when we talk about new ADUs that are considered new residential buildings. But I like to remind people the three basics behind how we show compliance to the energy code. We have mandatory requirements. These are a minimum. You can't ever do worse than this. And they were features that are shown to be cost effective everywhere all the time. An example of that is the minimum insulation requirements for a 2x4 wall is R13. Whereas prescriptively, now this is based on, is it new construction? It's cheaper to incorporate energy saving features when you're designing and building for the first time versus an alteration or an addition. And we'll definitely see with these ADUs that are classified as additions, the leniency towards how we look at the energy features associated with that building really change, because we have existing infrastructure we have to take into consideration. And again, that cost effectiveness dictates that the energy code have different requirements for those types of projects depending upon their climate zone. And we always have the ability to use the performance approach to get flexibility where we trade prescriptive measures, and we might even trade them down as bad as the mandatory minimum, like that R13 wall insulation for 2x4, but we can also increase things such as mechanical efficiency so that we can get that balance of we are an equal energy consuming building as the perfect prescriptive model that we're compared to. So we have 16 climate zones in California, and those really do dictate, especially your insulation and window requirements. How much energy are you consuming because of how hot it is outside? And quite a bit of California is very hot versus how mild it might be outside. This totally explains. I live in climate zone 3 and I love it, and I wouldn't ever want to move inland because I love the fog, and I love the fact that the ocean keeps my temperatures here in my area quite moderate. And that is 100% looked at when we talk about the viability of how the energy code applies to certain building types and locations. When we talk about ADUs, there's lots of challenges. City setbacks, it might be that we only have so much room, and we might be using an existing building that's there already, such as a garage, and we don't have the ability to have thicker walls or start adding things to that building because we have to maintain setbacks. There has been some flexibility with setbacks with some of these new ADU rules, so do be aware of keeping track of that and what it looks like in your particular area. Utility setbacks. We're hearing from the utilities that, especially for new ADUs that people are putting on their property, they're not thoroughly researching what the utility setback requirements are for any new utilities that need to be brought to that ADU. And it's causing a lot of heartache. It can either, one, cost a heck of a lot of money to bring the utilities to that new ADU that was not predetermined or understood was going to be a cost associated with the project, and or that you just can't get the utility back there in a manner that's cost effective. So please do really be thinking ahead of time in terms of your setbacks, not just city setbacks, but utility setbacks. And Michael and I were talking in the lobby a little bit about also then considering adding on to the existing utility associated with the single family property. There's some costs associated with that also, and is it viable in terms of can the utility in that region, the utility at the street, the conduit to the property, etc., what needs to be done to be able to handle the additional load of an ADU? So many things to be thinking of. Property height restrictions, that definitely goes into play when we start talking about some of the roof and high performance attic requirements the energy code is looking for. Limitations based on just what's there already. We don't want to rebuild something that's already a good contender for a ADU in which we're converting, let's say, a 2-car garage to an ADU. Knowing what utilities are available, we are finding that the energy code historically has looked at natural gas as something very favorable as especially space heating and water heating because it's a very inexpensive utility source. And remember, the energy code is based on cost effectiveness. But we're finding that the cost, and even just finding someone who's willing to trench back to the back of the property to bring a gas line to a new ADU is becoming very difficult and challenging. So how can we avoid using natural gas and use all electric and not have that additional utility? So we'll take a look at that, some pretty exciting things with this code cycle to open up the door for looking at all electric when we look at these new residential buildings. So lots of coordination needs to happen in terms of, again, that utility setback, and then also there's special inspectors that are needed and specialty contractors you might not be used to dealing with, such as PV contractors, because some of these ADUs, brand new ADUs, do have PV requirements, and HERS raters. And we'll take a look at who they are and how they work into this. So when we look at the energy code and accessory dwelling units, as Michael was saying, we have two different definitions. We have the definition that an ADU is an addition. And an addition is looking at existing infrastructure and looking at the cost effectiveness associated with tapping into something that's already there. So the energy code requirements look a lot less stringent when we consider an ADU an addition. And we're going to look at quite a few examples of when an ADU is considered an addition. Versus it's brand new. This means it is built from scratch, nothing was ever there before, and it's not attached to anything that was there before, it's freestanding. Well, then it's considered a new residential building and is subject to all of the energy code requirements associated with the new residential construction. So when I'm looking at what is considered an addition, I am converting, let's say, an attached garage. I have a 2-car garage that's built and attached to the existing single-family home, and I'm converting it to an ADU. That's going to be considered an addition. Another type of addition is, well, that ADU wasn't there before, but I'm going to attach it. It's going to be connected to the existing home, either through walls, roofs, floors, something that connects it to the existing single-family home. That's considered an addition, and there's a lot of flexibility that we'll be seeing associated with that. And this is the one that always people kind of struggle with a bit. It's a detached building, so it's not attached to the existing home at all, but it exists. It's a 2-car garage, it's a storage unit, it's a pool house, it's a, oh, shall I say it out loud, a building done without a permit. But it's there already. So we get to consider those buildings additions also, because we're using existing infrastructure and converting it to habitable space as a residential unit. But what's going to be considered a new residential building is it's built from scratch and it's detached and not connected to the main home at all. And that is now subject to all of the energy code requirements without exception. I was asked to quickly go through, hey, what's the compliance form documentation process of the code? The one that's going to be really important for you in your design is the certificate of compliance. This is the CF1R. This is what an energy consultant will be working with you to develop about what are your insulation requirements, what are your window specs, what are your mechanical systems, how are you designing the building to meet the promise of the energy code, and how is that then documented with a form. But we still have more forms. The energy code is so form heavy, it's not even funny. We have certificate of installation forms. These need to be provided by the contractor. And the contractor has to be aware what was promised back here with this certificate of compliance. And the certificate of installation has to provide, this is what was installed that met the promise of what was designed for the project. And this is a liability document between the contractor and the homeowner. The building department's not going to collect these. This is not about showing compliance to the building code at all, honestly. This is about the contractor taking liability about, I built a building meeting the promise of the design, and that's what I'm leaving you with. The energy code has a lot of moving parts, and if they're not installed properly, we can be actually using more energy and not saving energy. So there are a lot of verification requirements of the energy code, of testing equipment before final occupancy to make sure it's working properly to meet the promise of the energy savings design that was promised way back with your design documents. And who's doing that verification? Our third-party inspectors, what we call HERS raters. HERS stands for Home Energy Rating System, and it's a program that's throughout the United States, but we use them a little special here in California, where they are going to be maintained by one of two providers, either Cal Energy, oh, they're Cheers now, I forgot they changed their name again, and Cal Certs. So those are the two providers that train and maintain the HERS raters that go out and actually do the verification work. These HERS raters have to be third party. They cannot be under the employ of the contractor, nor related to the contractor, to be that person who goes out and tests the equipment to make sure it's working properly. So let's talk about converted ADUs first. So this first example is I'm converting a space within the building and convert it to an ADU. So my example here is, this is a project that we worked on where they had, it was built into a hill, so they had some unconditioned storage area in the back of their basement floor. And they converted that to an ADU that was within the structure of the existing home. It was not habitable space before. They converted it to habitable space. And because of that, there's a lot of exceptions of how we look at the requirements. But the one question I get a lot of is, hey, Gina, I had these great windows. They were installed when the house was originally built in 1940, and we're going to use those windows. Well, I got to tell you that any window feature has to meet current code. So that 1940 window probably doesn't mean current code, and we have to really look at those windows to see, do we really want to take the liability of the energy loss associated with those windows, or do we want to replace them and not take that energy loss? Because I do have some flexibility in that performance calculation, but is it really worth it? Is that where you want to use your energy flexibility, is using existing windows? So that's one of the first conversations we have with clients who like to maintain as much of the existing infrastructure as possible. Another ADU is they're attaching and adding on to the home. It didn't exist there before, but it's attached to the home. And the very same exact considerations we have for converted unconditioned space, we have for this brand new. I have brand new walls, I have a brand new floor, I even may have a brand new roof we've done a lot where they're adding on underneath the home so we don't have roofs. Every construction is different. And this is an example of a home that added on basically another wing to the home, and that was the new ADU that was associated with the project. So I want to talk about the leniency that's put into place for walls associated with additions. So walls are either extended from existing walls, they're on the same plane, either out or up or down, or those walls were there already and they're now just enclosing conditioned space. So those are what I call converted walls. Or we have brand new walls that are not extended from existing walls. They weren't walls that were already there. Those are walls that have to meet current code requirements, and those are the walls that are going to be challenging. But if it's extended or converted, the requirements are much more lenient. If it's a 2x4 wall, we have to fill the cavity with R15. It's a condensed bat that fits in a 3.5-inch cavity. But we don't have to consider rigid insulation or any other the fancy stuff we have to do if it's a brand new wall. If it's a 2x6 wall, we have to fill that cavity with R21. And the reason you see that writing on my slide here in purple, because those are the changes that are associated with this 2019 code cycle. In the 2016 code cycle, it only needed R19. In the 2019 code cycle, you're pulling that permit as of January 1st of this year. The insulation needed for those extended or converted walls is actually now R21, a condensed bat that fits in the 5.5-inch cavity. But if it's a new wall, it's not converted, it's not extended, well then we have different requirements. And the project I showed you where they added on a wing, you can see I have outlined in purple here. These are my 2 extended walls in which I have leniency to match the framing depth of the wall that's there already without rigid. But I have 3 other walls that are not extended from the existing walls, and those have to meet the requirements of new walls. For this particular project, they wanted all the walls to look exactly the same, so they used the performance approach, took a penalty for using 2x4 construction for those new walls without rigid insulation, and they increased the efficiency of the mechanical system, honestly, is what they did. So what do I need for new walls? So new walls, one, the mandatory minimum insulation requirements. So we talked earlier about the 2x4 walls are R13. There's a new mandatory minimum for 2x6 walls. It was R19 in the last code cycle. Now you can never ever go below R20. And that is not a bad insulation, that is a blow-in insulation. If you were to use a bad insulation, well then you would be looking at R21 because R20 bad insulation doesn't exist. But prescriptively, we're looking at walls that have at least an inch of rigid insulation not interrupted by framing. And that could be on the outside of the wall. So here I'm showing you a detail of the continuous insulation outside the framing attached to the outside of the wall. It could be on the inside of the wall too. We find that you're losing floor area. There's so many more penetrations you got to deal with. It is not fun. So we just don't see that often. You can also do staggered stud. I find that staggered stud is becoming a much more popular wall assembly, of which that continuous insulation and now is within the inside of the wall. That is not interrupted by framing. My climate zones 6 and 7 are just so moderate. I mean, honestly, you almost don't need walls if you have a home in those areas, but the energy code requirements are not very stringent. They're the same they've been for 3 code cycles now. But any other climate zone has an increased stringency of U factor that honestly, let's take that framed wall and let's do a 2x6 framed wall. We're talking that R21 in that cavity plus R5, that's going to be a closed cell polystyrene or a polyisocyanurate product to get that R5 at 1 inch. If you want to use an open cell, well, then you might need 1.5 to 2 inches to get that equivalent R5. There's so much flexibility in how you achieve the minimum U factor requirements of the energy code. It's kind of what works best for your design and how creative do you want to be. My last type of addition ADU is when I'm converting a detached structure on the property to habitable space as an ADU. That is still considered an addition, even though it's not attached to the existing home at all. So here's a project we did where they converted a freestanding garage, and then I get a lot of questions. They're like, but Gina, it's too small. All these walls get to either be 2x4 with R15 or 2x6 with R21. I don't even have to talk to them about new walls, but then they want to add on to the back of it. So now I have 3 converted walls. See if you can see all this. I have 2 extended walls, but then I have 1 new wall in the back here, of which if I were to use the prescriptive approach, it would have to have that continuous insulation. We did end up using the performance approach so that all these walls could look the same, and they increased efficiency on their mechanical systems for that flexibility. Another thing that's new to this code cycle is QII. And that is quality installation as is verified by that third-party inspector, a HERS rater. And this, they have to do 2 inspections. They inspect the air barrier to make sure all the nooks and crannies and everything has been caulked appropriately before any insulation is installed. And then they make sure every little bit of installed insulation is installed properly for them to say, yes, you have passed a QII inspection. There's numerous inspections, a minimum of 3. Most times there's up to 8 to 10 inspections for this particular verification, and is now required for any of those additions that are converted ADUs if they exceed 700 square feet. So if you have an ADU at 400 square feet, you're not going to have to worry about this. You have a converted ADU at 720 square feet, you're going to have to consider what does QII look to your project. This is a prescriptive measure, so you are allowed to trade it away in a performance calculation, but we are finding it's a very difficult measure to trade away because there's a lot of energy savings associated with this. Any of our ADUs that are brand new construction, detached from the home, I don't care if it's only 100 square feet, QII is prescriptively required. So coordination, making sure you're going to know who your HERS rater is and bring them on at design. They're going to give you some great information that's going to help you design your building to QII, such as for QII, insulated headers are required. So there are things that you need to know in designing to a QII building that might be outside your comfort range. Bring that HERS rater in at design and let them make sure your design can actually meet the inspection process. Kitchen hoods, we have new requirements for kitchen hoods. I don't care if it's for a new ADU, a converted ADU, or even if you're remodeling an existing kitchen in a single family home. Kitchen hoods must now be certified through either one of 2 agencies, HBI or AHAM, that they are quiet, that they have a zone rating, 3 zones or less, and they do a minimum standard ventilation airflow, 100 CFM or greater. For most kitchen layouts, there are some exceptions to what that looks like when we have open kitchens versus enclosed kitchens. And this is going to be verified by that third-party HERS rater. Now, what I'm hearing is a lot of the kitchen hoods that many of our designers are using and are comfortable using are not certified through HBI or AHAM. So I strongly suggest all of you who have some standard specs or kitchen hoods that you like using all the time, research now whether they're certified or not so that you know that inspection process, they're ready for that final occupancy permit, but they can't get it because the kitchen hood wasn't certified. That is something that no one wants to deal with at the last minute. Utility choices. So a lot of cities, especially in my area here in the Bay Area, are going all electric. And one thing I want to say over and over again is when I say all electric, I mean heat pump technology. All electric heat pump, all electric heat pump. I don't want any of you to think that electric resistance space heating or electric resistance point of use or any type of water heating is going to be allowed under this energy code. That is not a good use of electricity to generate heat. But heat pump technology is an excellent way of using electricity to generate heat. So you now can go all electric for your ADU without penalty. Last code cycle, you took a pretty big penalty for not using a gas tankless water heater. This code cycle, you use a tank heat pump water heater, and there's not going to be any penalty. And in fact, if you use a NEA 3 rated water heater, which is what's most common out there, that is the water heater choice that is sold, you get some nice credit because it's a very efficient piece of equipment. And mini ductless split systems have always been such a popular choice for ADUs because they deal with a small space so well. But there have been difficulties in us taking advantage of the efficiency stated by the manufacturers, because I got to tell you, the Energy Commission didn't believe it. They're like, really, a SEER of 28? We doubt it. We're going to make you prove it. So they've been doing this research project for the last 6 years, and their results have come out, and they found that that SEER rating of 28 is not realistic. And in large part, it's with how the heat pump system is designed and installed. So you can now actually take some nice credit for a ductless mini split system if you do a few things. So one, a HERS rater is going to verify it was installed properly. So that's one thing that has to happen, is that third-party inspector. Every habitable room that's greater than 100 square feet will have to have its own indoor unit. So if you just have one indoor unit and you have 3 small rooms, it's not that, you can't take this credit. So any room over 100 square feet that's habitable has to have its own indoor unit. And there has to be a wall-mounted thermostat for each of those indoor units. A lot of these systems now have a remote thermostat. It's a remote, and you put it in a little pocket on the wall. And well, the Energy Commission's like, well, if that thermostat or that temperature device is not in the room, it's not working right. And someone might have put it in their pocket or took it into the bathroom with them and forgot to leave it behind, and it's not working efficiently. So it has to be a hardwired thermostat to the wall. And that's caused some problems with some of these installed systems, because the manufacturer has to struggle a bit because their products don't 100% support that. It has to be considered by the contractor what they're going to do to make sure to meet these criteria that's going to be verified by that HERS rater. So how does new construction detached from the home look different? So now all of a sudden there's absolutely no exceptions to meeting the new wall requirements that we looked at, that U factor of 0.048. There's no such thing as extended or converted walls. And if you want leniency towards not putting rigid insulation on those walls, or not having a really thick wall, that 2x6 wall with 1 inch of rigid plus all the other finishes, it's getting pretty big and we're getting pretty close to the property line. You're going to have to use the performance approach to get that flexibility. We also have high performance attic requirements that are associated with our detached brand new ADUs that I find is a challenge, because most people want to use a rafter roof to really get as much volume, and visual space within their small ADUs. So that's usually something we struggle with also. But what we also need to talk about is we measure energy performance for these new detached ADUs and any new single family home differently now. We use an EDR score. We historically have used a TDV score, a time-dependent value, of which you have a score and you have to be equal or better than 0. And if your 10% is, your score is 10%, you're 10% better than the worst building that's allowed to be built in California. This EDR score is kind of like going in the opposite direction. So with a TDV score, the higher the number, the better you were performing. With an EDR score, the lower the number, the better you're performing, because 100 represents the worst building that actually has never been allowed to be built in California, because this is a measurement system that's being used throughout the US. It's not just California. And 0 represents, honestly, a 0 net energy home that has enough on-site renewable to offset their energy uses over the course of the entire year. And remember I said that 2020 was supposed to be the Z&E code cycle for residential? Well, we weren't able to show cost effectiveness. So I like to call it the, as close as we could get to zero cost effectively code cycle. And the EDR scores that are required by the Energy Commission through the Building Energy Code is around 20 to 25, depends on the size of the building, depends on climate zone. So much goes into that score. So the homeowner, or you as the designer, can still choose to make the building go to zero to truly be a Z&E home, but that is not at all dictated by this code cycle and the Energy Code. We do have two scores. We have a building efficiency score. That's what we've had forever. Your insulation, your windows, your mechanical systems. How much energy are you using? How much energy are you saving with your design and construction practice? But we have a new bucket, and this new bucket is PV photovoltaics plus flexibility. Because for the very first time, these new detached residential buildings, PV is required. You have the ability to use battery as a flexibility, meaning now that flexibility feature allows you to trade it towards building efficiency. You want 2x4 walls? Put in a battery. It works just like if it was a high efficiency mechanical system. You get to trade with building efficiency. You want to oversize your PV system? No trading at all to building efficiency. That will give you nothing. You have to meet the minimum PV requirements, and that's where it is. If you oversize it, well, then maybe you might be able to make some money from the utilities. Good luck. But you're not going to get anything towards how you are designing and building the home. And we're looking at those two scores. If you met PV, but you didn't meet building efficiency, you do not comply. If you meet building efficiency, but are not providing the minimum PV, you do not comply. You have to do both. And that's very unique and different to this code cycle. So what are these PV requirements? It's based on climate zone. Hopefully that makes sense. Some climate zones are using a lot more electricity because they're using a lot more air conditioning than other climate zones. And the size of the building is going to matter because the conditioned floor area is part of the equation, and also number of dwelling units. So if I have a multifamily building, their PV size is much bigger than a single family home. So I did an example here of a 300 square foot ADU in climate zone 4. That's the San Jose area. We do a lot of projects there. And when I go into this formula and I get the minimum PV required 1.39 kW. That is so small. That is so small that most PV contractors are not even going to talk to you. That's so small. So I find a lot of times these PV kW requirements are so small, starting the conversation on getting an installed PV system to an existing single family property is a bit of a challenge. Now, I do have a lot of questions I get regarding this, like, is there any exception to PV? Well, the only exception to PV is because you can show the roof of that designed ADU is in the shade. It's in the shade because it's covered with trees. It's in the shade because it's surrounded by large buildings. It's in the shade because of topography of the area, like hills and mountains. It is not because the roof was designed in such a way that it's in the shade. It's facing 100% north. That is not ever going to be an exception to PV. The Energy Commission is saying you're going to design your roof to support the PV kW, and or you can put that PV somewhere else, but we're going to base it on your roof. So if you can show you don't have at least 80 contiguous square feet all in one place that gets sun at least 70% or more of the year, then you're exempt. But you have to provide a shade study, and that shade study has to be done using Energy Commission approved solar assessment tools, of which currently we have 3 available. The only one that really honestly helps at design is Aurora, where it takes a PDF of the designed roof design and plops it, and they do a Google Earth, and they figure out exactly what's there already. You can add trees, figure out shading. These and Scanifly and Solmetric are all in the field solar assessment measurement tools. I don't use that. I use Aurora because I get to stay behind my computer and do it all from my office, and I don't have to go out in the field. But if you are saying, I don't have enough sun on my ADU roof for PV, then one of these three tools has to be used to prove your point before you submit to the building department. Common questions I get on PV. Can the PV system be leased? Yes. The Energy Commission has no rules about the PV system has to actually be owned by the homeowner. They say it has to be installed on site before final. We don't care if you bought it. We don't care if you leased it. I have a lot of people ask, well, can I invest in a green energy program instead of actually installing PV on my property? No, that is not an alternative. Can I use the existing PV system I have on my single family home already? I put it in 2 years ago. I sized it knowing I was going to be doing an ADU in the next few years. So I have enough PV kW there already. I'll just use my existing PV system. No. You can add to your existing PV system, but you cannot use it instead of, because this is new construction. What are you adding to the property that meets these PV requirements? So honestly, the most popular choice my clients have been doing is adding that 1.37 kW to their existing PV system. Do I have to do PV when it's a converted ADU that's considered an addition? No. PV is not required for additions or alterations of any sort associated with with residential, only new detached residential buildings. Reach codes. So many cities are deciding to go above and beyond state code. And the flavors of these reach codes in the past have been, in our city, you're going to have 10% better compliance margin to build in our city. And that's what they kind of look like in the past. This code cycle, we're seeing a whole new buckets and ways that cities are developing reach codes. And this is all the ones that are available that are supported through a reach code program called localenergycodes.com. This is an amazing website. I'm hoping all of you will bookmark this because I'll show you some amazing things on this website. We're going to dive into the Building Efficiency Renewables tab. And they have this map that indicates all the cities that have adopted reach codes, that when you submit in their city, you need to be aware of their reach code requirements that supersede state code. And there's quite a few. And they actually put this great chart together. I love this one, where they tell you the flavor of their reach code, because reach codes can do whatever they want. They have to show cost effectiveness. They have to petition to the Energy Commission to get approved for it to be enforceable, and they have to go through a public review process. But each city can decide what the flavor looks like. And here we see some cities that are adopting electric only, meaning natural gas is not going to be allowed to be attached to that new building. And you can see the cities here. Currently, these are approved reach codes in Brisbane, Cupertino, Hayward, Hillsburg, Los Gatos, etc. There's also another one, electric only, saying, okay, we want electric only, but we get it, you really want gas. Well, then now your building has to be 10% better than minimum. So a lot of other cities are saying, do all electric. Remember, all electric means heat pump. You're done. Or if you want to use natural gas for space heating or water heating, that compliance margin now has to be better than an all-electric building. Other cities then are also potentially saying, you're going to put PV on that building, even though the energy code says you don't have to. So that one's another interesting one. And we're seeing others about what it is that you can do all electric versus you can do mixed fuel. Like Campbell is one I thought was interesting, in which you have to use heat pump technology for space heating and water heating, but you can bring in natural gas for appliances such as the stove, such as the oven, such as a gas fireplace. But then you have to wire the home and have it ready for a future all-electric utility appliance choice in the future, meaning you have to make sure that panel and your electrical load can handle that future equipment even though you're using gas right now. So all sorts of different flavors going on. So we have so much on our website to help support you understanding this topic better. If you're someone who loves to model, you are also your energy modeler, because there's no conflict with being the energy consultant and the design architect at the same time. We have some YouTube videos on how to model these different types of ADUs. We also have some classes that are designed just for you, the architect. We have one that's going to be offered August 3rd and August 4th. It's a 2-day class, 3.5 hours each day. One for just non-residential buildings, really thinking about what do architects need to know about the energy code. And we have another one coming on August 12th and 13th that's devoted to residential construction, where we are really concentrating on single family. We do talk about ADUs and a little bit about low-rise multifamily construction when it comes to the energy code. Here's my contact information. I am supported by the utilities throughout the state to answer your questions after today. Please don't call me. I am doing this all the time, so I'm never answering the phone, but I love answering email. I love multitasking. I cannot do energy calculations for you for free, but I can answer your questions about how the energy code applies. Just feel free to email me. Here are all my program managers with all the different utilities throughout California. Whew. And that is the end of my presentation. Michael, do we have questions?
Thanks, Gina. Wow, that was a high-powered and fast-paced run through.
That's why you guys needed that handout.
amount of material. You really did a great job. And yes, we have a whole stable of questions. We are going to be online for about another 15 minutes. So feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box, and then I'll be going through those. We may not get to every question, but for those who have questions that didn't get answers, Gina's been so kind as to share her email address, and I'm sure she's going to get a few emails. And I apologize, I'm going to paraphrase some of these questions. Max asks, let's say you have a detached garage, Gina, and you add an area to the existing garage, leaving the garage, but you add to it to create an ADU. Is that an addition, or is that a new construction?
That is considered an addition because you're adding on to existing infrastructure. The Energy Commission puts out a quarterly newsletter called a blueprint, and I'm hoping all of you will go to the Energy Commission's website. I wish I had my slide about how to sign up for this blueprint. And they send you this blueprint automatically 4 times a year. They just came out with one 3 weeks ago, and they addressed that question. I'm adding on to an existing garage. That addition to the garage that's going to stay as is going to be an ADU. Is that an addition? Yes, it is. And it is subject to all the leniency that is allowed for ADUs considered additions.
Cool. Karen asks about a question that you've already touched on, which is, we're all supportive of PV and adding those, but there are many urban areas where the performance of PV is limited because of the surroundings, tall adjacent buildings, existing trees, and so forth. And maybe you could expand a little bit, since you did point out that there are 3 tools that are approved to demonstrate how you can avoid the on-site solar. And you mentioned that one of them was allowed. Maybe give us a few more thoughts about that particular program. Does it cost to use? What kind of output does it provide?
So that's Aurora. And Aurora, their main intent is to help people design PV systems. And where should those PV systems be, and how to generate the most kW out of where you're putting your PV and what PV products you're using. And it just ends up that because they do such an amazing job of figuring out the best place to put PV in a 3D environment on the computer using Google Earth, that it's a great product to figure out how your designs support or don't support the PV kW requirements of the code. It does cost money. I got to tell you, it's their starting thing. You can either do it by project, and it's a few $100s per project, or you can get a license, and it's a couple $1,000s for a yearly license, and you really have to learn how to use it. So what I recommend is a couple of different things. I know my company is an energy consulting firm. We're taking that on, and we're offering that as a service to our architects. Give us your roof design, even give us a couple of roof designs. Let us work out, do you have enough solar access to even meet the requirement, let alone I don't care what your design is, and then how does your roof design, if we figured out you have enough sun, best support your PV kW. But honestly, your PV contractor, get familiar, comfortable, and in cahoots, shall I say, with a few PV contractors in your area, and they're going to be able to provide this service for you. So again, coordination early, having some people in your back pocket that you know can help you with this. If you want to take on learning Aurora, yes, there is a learning curve and there is a cost, but I think it's amazing. I think it's just a fantastic product.
Cool, thanks, Gina. Michelle asked about a project in San Diego where her client had an ADU that was done without a permit. It was a garage conversion without a permit. She says that her consultant said that it's going to be considered new construction and would require PV, but it is an existing ADU. So, and I wanted to add a nuance to this and to help Michelle. If you go to the HCD website, and I posted a link in the chat box, you'll find that there is a moratorium on enforcement for substandard or ADUs done without permits of 5 years, and for local jurisdictions that they have to give consideration. So that's an added mechanism. But from an energy code standpoint, Gina, how would you respond to that?
That is an addition. That is not new construction. And to add on to what you're saying about local authority, what we call the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction, there's a lot more local rules about how do we look at projects done without permits. And there are quite a few cities. I got to tell you, I'm not up to speed on San Diego. I would have to reach out and talk to them. Quite a few cities are putting into play that, well, when was it built? It was built in 1986. What were the code requirements in 1986? And they make you meet the requirements of when that project was built. That's being done in many of the major cities. So talk to your building department. I'm sorry that you have an energy consultant who's telling you that's new construction. Based on what I'm hearing, it is not. But at the end of the day, I would talk to the building department, period, just to see what type of leniency that might be in place for you and what does that really mean to the project.
Cool. Evie asks about historic districts, or, you know, it could be a historic structure, and window requirements that might be maybe not the most efficient window, but you know how that can be where something is mandated because it needs to meet one set of criteria that may conflict with another set of criteria. Can you offer any thoughts or experiences regarding that?
If it is a qualified historic structure, all of the envelope requirements are exempt because the historic status takes precedence, even though it might not be a great energy efficient building. If you're building a building to look like a historic building, there's no exceptions there. And that's when you would probably be using that performance method to get that flexibility, to get that window product that matches what potentially is required for the area and offset it with other building features. We have a couple areas here in the East Bay that had some pretty vigilant requirements of adding on and building in a certain residential district. I got to tell you, just recently, they backed off of. They wanted single pane wood windows to match everything else in the neighborhood because they realized what a detriment they were leaving behind with a building that was using way too much energy. So qualified historic building, even though you're converting it, et cetera, exempt. Brand new, built to look like, no exceptions. You'll have to see what type of flexibility you can do with your design features.
Thanks, Gina. Jennifer asked about small capacity heat pump water heaters. I know we've had a couple of instances where an ADU is very small.
Yeah.
And the only heat pump hot water we can find is a big tank, like
50 gallons, the smallest one. Yeah, and that's the nature of the beast. Heat pump technology slowly heats the water. So it needs to have the storage device. It's basically a battery. It's a battery of hot water. And if you don't have that tank, you're never going to have enough hot water. It's just not going to happen. And then I get a lot of clients who are like, well, I want to do an electric resistance point of use water heater. And when you consider how much electricity is needed to heat that water as it's flowing over the elements, it's crazy. The amount of electricity, one, the draw, and the ampage you need. So it's just not a good choice. Then what we do usually is we really look at what's the existing infrastructure. would it make sense to tap into the existing water heating system that's serving the single family property? Because there's nothing saying that you can't bring a hot water line out to your ADU. Maybe that's a better choice than a freestanding 50-gallon heat pump water heater for, let's say, a 300 square foot ADU.
Thanks. We have a couple of questions coming in the chat window too, so I'm going to jump over there, divert my attention. One is about fire rebuilds. We've had these incredible fires the last few years. Are there any differences in the requirements in when you're doing a rebuild?
There are. So there was a new bill that was just passed that if you're rebuilding because of fire and you're in one of these, they're a state national emergency, well, it's declared a natural disaster by the government. So it's not your home was the only home in the town that got burned down, the whole town got burned down. And you meet some other criteria. You low income, there's like 3 different criteria that you have to meet. Rebuild in a natural disaster area, and one of these other 3 criteria, PV is not required. So, and in our compliance software we use now, we have that as a drop-down option, rebuild and subject to this assembly build that exempts PV. So there aren't many requirements to the other efficiency requirements of the code, but there are for PV. But the wall, window, HVAC requirements look and feel exactly the same as a brand new building.
Cool. We may run out of time. We've got another just a few minutes here, but I'm going to keep hitting on questions until we get to the end. So Daniel talks about a steel building project in the desert, new construction that's going to be a home and an ADU. He wants to know what should I be looking out for?
Spray insulation, spray insulation, spray insulation.
Okay, that's very precise.
You need to encapsulate that metal and prevent any thermal transfer of heat, and that is going to be your design challenge.
Cool. We have a question about prefab ADUs and how is compliance, and you and I had a chat about this before the call started. Tell us about your experiences with prefab ADUs. I thought that was pretty fascinating what you were telling me.
Well, there's kind of 3 things we need to consider. The first thing I need to consider is what's the size of the ADU, because if it's over 700 square feet, remember we have those QII requirements where the HERS rater has to verify air barrier and insulation install, meaning they have to go to the factory and do that verification. Now, there have been a couple manufacturing facilities that have hired on staff their own, they hire HERS, can't be on staff because remember, can't be under the employ of the contractor. But they've hired someone to come in and do this verification. But very few of them have done that. I think I already know of 1 or 2 that have done that. 2, a lot of times they may say they're thinking California construction, but I don't really think they are. I think they are thinking structural, but they're not thinking energy, because I typically see it's a paneled system. And if that SIPs, great, but usually it's not. Usually it's a framed panel system, and then I have that whole rigid insulation issue. I don't typically have high performance attics, and there's typically a lot of glass. And so I find that a lot of the manufactured kits really are not meeting energy code compliance, and they might be meant to be uninhabitable accessory spaces, not habitable accessory spaces. And Michael, you had some experience with this too, you were saying.
Oh, just I noticed that some of the costs of those prefab units exceeded the cost of a custom-built on-site project, but they're all over the map. So we're right at 12:59, and I like to take timelines seriously. So all of you who have made it this far, and gosh, we had over 118 people.
Wow!
Just an amazing turnout, and you did a great job. Gina, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Everybody's really busy, and I'm sure you have paying customers who would rather you were working on their energy modeling right now, but you'll have a chance to get back to that. Everyone on this call is eligible that stuck with it for AIA HSW credits, and those should show up on your transcript. Thanks to Gina and Energy Code ACE, who sponsors her work. This slide deck and any additional resources will be emailed to those that Hillary has emails for. And there's more material in the chat box, links to a lot of different resources. And we invite everyone to both join the network, the ADU network. We earlier talked about an email to Katie Dahl. Will get you on that. And there are a lot of conversations and discussions on that. A lot of technical questions that design professionals run into one-off, like some of the questions that have come in. We do have additional webinars as part of this climate action series, AIA California. There's links to that. But with that, I'll release everyone. We're right on schedule, 1 o'clock p.m. Thanks all for taking the time and hope to see you at a future webinar. That's it.
Thank
for
you,
now.
everyone.
Well.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, everyone.